Our goal today is to mix our own color wheel using just the primary colors, magenta, yellow, and blue. These colors, along with a little bit of black and white, should already be at your tables. Also at your tables is a jar of brushes and palette knives. You should have brought your own palette to school to use, something like this from a takeout or food storage. You'll be using the lid as your palette. This is where you're going to mix your paint on top of, and then the container will get stored on top of it, keeping it airtight and saving your colors for you so you don't have to mix the colors every time you come back to class. You can just store them away. The bigger the lid, the more paint colors you can store on there, but you don't really need anything bigger than this. If you don't have your own, there are just lids that we have here that have been donated that you'll have to clean out at the end of class every day. Also at your seat, you should have brought your own paper towel and your own water. You want to keep cleaning your brush inside the water. You don't want to have to share that with somebody else because the dirtier your water, the dirtier your colors are. So let's get started. I'm going to use this as my palette today. Keep the lid facing so that I can put the dome on top of it like this. I don't want to mix the colors in here. I'm going to start with the colors in between blue and yellow. Blue and yellow are primary colors. To start out with, you just want a tiny bit of paint. If there's ever a time when you feel like you're squeezing the bottle too hard and you're forcing it because the paint is stuck, stop what you're doing, check the tip of the paint, see that there's not a bunch of dried out paint in there. If you keep squeezing it, you're gonna get an explosion and mess up your khakis. I always take a little bit more of the lighter color than the dark color. It's also a good idea to wet your brush before you start painting, just to get the bristles a little bit softer, and squeeze out most of the water from the brush. You don't use your brush to mix paint. You use the palette knife. In between yellow and blue are 3 colors on this color wheel. There could be a lot more, but we're going to keep it a little bit simple and do just the tertiary colors. The center pie shape is what you'd get if you mix an even amount of yellow and blue, and that is a secondary color, and it's green. So I'm going to start with some yellow, and I like to wipe off my palette knife right where my knee is. Start out with a tiny bit of blue because it's a dominant color. It's much darker than yellow, and it's going to mix in a lot faster. Try not to spread your paint all over the palette like that because it's just going to get thinner and spread everywhere, and it dries out a lot faster too. So try to keep it your mixing station, I guess, in one little spot. Now I'm looking at this and it still looks really yellow. So I could do 2 things. I could keep adding blue into there until I get the green that I want, or since I've already got a really nice yellow green, why not just paint it in the yellow green section? So that's what I'm gonna do. This is a yellow green, so I'll paint it right here. Sometimes when you get the paint on the paper, the white of the paper shows through enough that it lightens the color, and it might be just a little bit lighter than what you wanted. In this case, this does still look like yellow-green, but maybe I could have added a little bit more blue to it. So you might have noticed that yellow-green is right next to yellow and green. The tertiary names come just from their parent names. Yellow is the primary name, so it comes first in the tertiary name system. So we call it yellow, and then green as the second name. I use the side of my brush like this to go along lines instead of using the tip like that. It seems easier to me. For the color wheel, it's not going to be really important if you have super clean edges and lines. Try it so that you can practice when you're doing your regular painting. You have some practice at trying to get those really straight edges, but I'm not going to be grading down if you've got some little sloppiness in there. I'm really looking for your ability to see the difference between yellow, green, and green, see the difference between blue, green, and green, and be able to mix accordingly using the primary colors. So I'm going to add a little bit more blue to this yellow green. And it still looks, I don't know, it still looks a little bit more yellow than green. So we could even like add another step in here if you wanted, like add another little skinny slice of this kind of yellow green in there. But I'm going to try and get it just a little bit more green and add a tiny bit more blue to it. So we're using just hues to name our colors. We're using just yellow, orange, oops, too much blue. All the names that are part of the spectrum. If you buy paint or go and get crayons, you'll notice that those colors have different names, like Kelly green and shamrock green. It's just a way for people to help remember a specific type of color. So this looks more green. I'm going to get the yellow off my brush, rinse it off, dry off, and paint the green in the green spot. Okay, I'm just going to fill it in. It's just important that you have the color mixing on this color wheel. Getting the blue-green, which is next to blue. I'm going to add a ton more blue. So you see, even now, this kind of looks like another kind of just regular green, doesn't it? Rinse off my brush, dry it off, add a lot more of this blue. Now we're starting to see the difference, and you should be able to, when you're mixing colors, notice that there's more of a primary or a secondary in it. And in this case, we've got a lot more blue in this green than we have in yellow. Therefore, it's blue-green. And just like we did with the yellow greens, if we added even more blue to it, guess what? We'll get even more blue-green. I don't know if you want to call that blue-blue-green. Super blue-green. Sometimes you can even take the primary color and paint right into the paint if it's already wet on the surface. Maybe you want to try that so that you could do some blending, going from that blue-green into the blue. I'm just looking for you to mix the colors, but if you want to try that, go for it. And then we have blue in the blue space. Okay, so here you can see that the paint is kind of a little bit thicker than this paint. If you add a tiny bit of water to your brush, when that happens, if it's kind of like coagulating a little bit before your eyes, it'll thin the paint out for you and make it a little bit more fluid while you're painting. Some people would prefer to add it in right on the palette. Mix a little bit of water into the blue on your palette so that every time you brush with it, it's got more fluidity to it, more flow. Okay, so now we have mixed the tertiary and secondary colors in between yellow and blue. Next, we'll use magenta and blue. I've got a mess on my palette, and if I start to mix here with the magenta, it's going to mix in and we're going to get some ugly browns and possibly gray black. So I want to clean that off. Use my palette knife, scoop as much of that off as possible. And wipe it off. Even if there's the tiniest bit of that yellow or green on there, when it comes time to mixing some magenta in there, it's going to dull it down and totally change the color. And you don't want that. You want your colors to be pure. If you had any reason to save your blue-green, you could save it for tomorrow, but we're moving on. So I'm going to get a little bit of magenta, and you can see what happens when we mix magenta and blue. Wow, that is way too much. So when that happens, see if there's somebody at your table that needs a little bit of magenta, and you can scoop some off and give it to them. Don't put it back in the jar. Just in case you've got any kind of paint on your palette knife like this does right here, put it back in the jar. It's going to contaminate the whole thing. So just share it with your table mates. Alrighty. So we're going on to blue mixed with magenta. We're going to start with the magenta, and we'll add a little blue. There's some green in the palette over here. You can see I got some light green in there. I don't want that, so I'm going to scoop from this side. I got a really nice, like, rose color. What do you call that? Fuchsia? So let's save some of that and add a little bit more blue over here. See what we get to just this part here. And there's a really nice violet. So what if we have some violet and add a lot more blue to it. And we have this blue violet. Still looks a little bit similar to this one to me, so I'm going to add some more, push it farther to the blue side of the spectrum. There we go. Really nice blue violet. Clean off the palette knife. Got my brush. Paint that blue violet.